The first sign wasn't the explosion everyone expected, it was the silence. At dawn, the Strait of Hormuz, usually alive with the low growl of oil tankers and the constant chatter of radio signals, fell eerily quiet. The sea looked the same, a flat sheet of steel reflecting a pale, trembling sun, but beneath that calm surface something had shifted. Radar screens flickered, ships slowed, and across the world, traders stared at their terminals as numbers began to move in ways that made no sense. Thousands of miles away, in a dimly lit operations room in Washington, Daniel Reeves tightened his grip on the edge of a metal desk. He had spent 22 years in naval intelligence, long enough to recognize when a situation wasn't just bad. It was spiraling out of control. He had grown up in a military family, raised on discipline and quiet sacrifice. His father had taught him that strength wasn't about force. It was about foresight. And yet, as the data poured in, Daniel felt a knot forming in his chest. This wasn't foresight. This was fallout. "Sir, we're losing track of commercial routes," a young analyst whispered, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay composed. Daniel didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on a blinking map where red zones spread like a disease across the narrow waterway. The move, bold, aggressive, and announced just hours ago, was supposed to be decisive, a show of power. A line drawn in the sand, instead, it had triggered something far less predictable. Halfway across the globe, in a modest apartment overlooking the port city of Karachi, Ayesha Rahman stared at her phone as messages flooded in. She was an energy analyst, only 31, but already respected for her uncanny ability to read market patterns like a story unfolding. She had dreamed of stability her whole life, growing up in a family where every fluctuation in fuel prices meant choosing between comfort and survival. She had dedicated herself to understanding the invisible forces that controlled everyday lives. Now, those forces were unraveling in real time. "This can't be right," she murmured, refreshing her screen again. Oil prices weren't just rising, they were surging in violent, unpredictable spikes. Shipping insurance rates had tripled within minutes. Entire trade routes were freezing as companies pulled back, unsure of what came next. Her younger brother, Sami, leaned against the doorway, his face pale. "Pa, the news is saying ships are turning around, some are stuck out there." Ayesha looked at him, and for a moment the analyst disappeared. All that remained was an older sister who had promised to protect her family from exactly this kind of uncertainty. "It's not just ships," she said softly, "it's everything. Food, fuel, people don't realize how quickly this spreads." Back in Washington, Daniel finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Get me a direct line to command, now." He knew the name behind the move. Everyone did. It had been announced with the kind of confidence that left no room for doubt, framed as a necessary step to secure global stability. But stability, Daniel thought bitterly, wasn't something you could force into existence. It was something fragile, easily shattered. And now it was shattering. The first turning point came faster than anyone expected. A commercial tanker, massive, slow, moving, and filled with crude, sent out a distress signal. Not an attack, not a collision, just paralysis. Its navigation systems had failed completely, leaving it drifting in one of the most critical choke points in the world. Within minutes, 2 more ships reported similar issues. Ayesha watched the reports come in, her mind racing. "It's not random," she whispered, grabbing a notebook and scribbling connections. "This is coordinated or reactive. Either way, it's spreading." Her phone buzzed again, this time a call from her mentor, an older economist who had once told her that crises didn't start with chaos. They started with miscalculation. "Ayesha," he said without greeting, "this isn't just about one decision anymore. The market is reacting to fear, and fear multiplies." Meanwhile, in a small coastal village near the strait itself, Hassan, a fisherman in his late 40s, pulled his boat closer to shore. He had no access to high-level intelligence or global market data, but he understood the sea better than most men understood their own hearts. And today, the sea felt wrong. His son, barely 16, looked at him with confusion. "Abba, why are we heading back? The waters are calm." Hassan shook his head slowly. "Calm water can still hide a storm," he said. "You learn that, or you don't survive." As the hours passed, the world began to feel the strain. Airlines rerouted flights to avoid potential escalation zones, increasing travel times and costs. Stock markets dipped, then plunged, then rebounded in erratic bursts. Governments issued statements carefully worded, cautiously optimistic. But behind closed doors, emergency meetings stretched late into the night. Daniel stood alone for a moment, staring at a photograph on his desk. It was of his daughter, taken years ago at a beach. She was laughing, completely unaware of the fragile systems that made that moment possible. He wondered what kind of world she would inherit if this spiraled further. He picked up the phone again. "We need de-escalation channels open immediately," he said. "Whatever this was meant to achieve, it's doing the opposite." The second turning point hit just before nightfall. A cyberattack, unclaimed, sophisticated, and devastating, targeted multiple shipping coordination systems at once. Ports from the Middle East to Southeast Asia reported outages. Containers sat idle, supply chains, already strained, began to buckle. Ayesha felt her breath catch as the data confirmed her worst fear. "It's not just a regional issue anymore," she said, her voice barely audible. "This is global." Sami stepped closer. "What do we do?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and fear. "We adapt. We survive. That's what we've always done." In the village, Hassan's son watched the horizon as distant ships remained motionless, like ghosts frozen in time. "Will it pass?" he asked quietly. Hassan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Everything passes," he said. But not everything leaves things the same. Back in Washington, Daniel finally received confirmation that emergency diplomatic lines were open. It wasn't much, but it was something, a chance to pull back from the edge. The climax didn't come with a single explosion or dramatic headline. It came in a moment of realization, a quiet, heavy understanding shared across continents. This wasn't a show of strength. It was a reminder of how interconnected everything had become, and how quickly one move could ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could fully predict. Ayesha closed her laptop after hours of analysis, her mind exhausted but clear. "We always think power means control," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "But real power is knowing when not to push." Daniel leaned back in his chair, the tension in his shoulders finally easing, just slightly, as reports indicated the first signs of stabilization. "We're not out of this," he muttered, "but maybe we've learned something." And in the quiet village by the sea, Hassan and his son sat together under a sky filled with stars, the world's chaos feeling both distant and deeply personal. "Abba," the boy said after a long silence, "why does this happen?" Hassan looked out at the dark water, his expression thoughtful. "Because people forget," he said. "They forget that every action has a consequence, and every consequence belongs to all of us. The crisis didn't end that day. Markets would take time to recover, trust would take even longer, but something had shifted not just in systems or strategies, but in awareness. And perhaps that was the only real beginning, because in the end, the lesson wasn't about power or politics. It was about responsibility and the fragile, invisible threads that hold the world together until someone pulls too hard.